Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going behind the scenes in the world of building and design. And gotta say, the sources you gave me, really fascinating stuff. We've got text on all different kinds of professionals, a bunch on the different types of surveys involved, even some cool stuff about how those surveys can actually shape design decisions.
Yeah, it's a whole intricate ecosystem, that's for sure. But that's what makes it so interesting.
I'm already seeing that. I mean, just the sheer number of people involved is kind of mind-blowing. Like, obviously, you've got your architects and designers, but the sources also mentioned conservation bodies, quantity surveyors, even town planners.
Mm.
I had no idea so many different people had a hand in these projects.
Yeah, and that's really the key, that collaborative approach. It's essential because each professional brings their own unique perspective, their expertise, skills, and that makes sure every aspect of a project is looked at carefully.
Right, so you avoid ending up with, like, this gorgeous building that's totally unsafe or a beautiful garden that floods every
Or
time it rains.
exactly, exactly.
Actually, speaking of different perspectives, something that really jumped out at me from your sources was how prospective purchasers and even the general public are considered stakeholders. I always assumed those decisions were like made by experts behind closed doors.
Well, expert knowledge is crucial, definitely. But the best projects, they also factor in the needs and the preferences of the people who will actually be using the space. I mean, after all, a building or a park, it's not just some, abstract idea. It's a place where real people are going to live, work, play.
Yeah, that's a good point. It definitely changes how I think about it. Okay, so some of the roles mentioned in your sources, though, I got to be honest, I'm a little lost. Like, I get architects, landscape architects, but what exactly does a quantity surveyor do?
Think of them like the financial guardians of the project. They're the ones who really dive deep into the costs at every stage, from the initial planning all the way through construction, even beyond.
Okay, so they're the ones who make sure a project doesn't go, like, way over budget.
Exactly. They help ensure that whatever the vision is, it can actually be realized without, breaking the bank.
So crucial, especially with those massive projects.
Absolutely, yeah. And it just highlights like any complex undertaking, building and design, it needs a whole team of experts, each with their own vital role.
Okay, that explains the who, but what about the what? The knowledge these folks need. Your sources talk about that too. Designers, for example. I was surprised by how much technical knowledge they need, not just like the artistic side. Apparently, they need to understand regulatory standards, even the properties of different building materials.
It's true. It's this balance they have to strike between like the artistry and the practical realities because a designer has to translate their vision into something that's, well, buildable, something that's safe, functional, and follows all those building codes.
So they can't just design something that looks amazing. It's got to actually work in the real world.
Exactly. That's where understanding materials, construction methods, that's where it all comes in.
Right, right. What about landscape architects? I used to think they basically just like picked pretty plants and arranged them nicely. But your sources, they paint a whole different picture. They've got to consider soil types, sustainable practices, even erosion control.
It's a lot more than just aesthetics, that's for sure. They're creating outdoor spaces that are visually appealing, sure, but also ecologically sound,
Hmm.
functional. They're kind of like environmental stewards,
Yeah.
making sure the natural landscape is integrated into the design. Respect it.
Wow, I'm realizing a lot of these professions I thought I knew, they're way more complex than I imagined.
Eh,
And your sources also include a ton on those surveys. We all know the basic ones, right? Location plans, site plans, floor plans.
Right.
But before we dive into those, anything else in the professionals involved? Anything we missed?
Oh, actually, yes. There's one more group that's often overlooked, the architectural technicians. They're kind of like the bridge between the architect's big vision and the nitty-gritty of construction.
Oh, interesting.
They take those complex designs and turn them into the detailed technical drawings, the specifications that the builders will actually use.
So they're the ones who make sure the architect's idea can actually be built.
Exactly. They figure out all the nuts and bolts of how the building will actually come together.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so now on to those surveys. Like I said, we all know the basics, location plans, site plans, floor plans. But I have a feeling there's more to them than meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely. Even those basic ones, they're more complex than people think. Like, take floor plans. Most folks, they just think about the layout of rooms. But your sources, they point out floor plans. They often include a lot of detail about things like, electrical wiring, plumbing, even ventilation system.
Yeah, it's
That
like this whole hidden world under the surface, all those systems we rely on every day. I never really thought about how much planning goes into making sure, like, our lights turn on or
Mhm.
the toilet flushes.
It's true. And it really highlights the work of those architectural technicians we were talking about, the ones translating the designer's vision into those precise technical specs, making sure it all works.
Right, right.
But, even going back to those, what we call the simple ones, the site plans, actually, one of your sources had this really cool example of how a site plan revealed some important historical information about a property, led to them finding some archaeological remains.
Whoa, that's amazing. Like, just from the site plan.
Yeah. So even something like a basic site plan can hold these clues to the past. It's pretty cool, right? Makes you
Right.
wonder what's hidden under all these places we see every day.
Definitely. Okay, so we've covered the kind of familiar territory.
Mm.
Location plans, site plans, and floor plans. But your sources also get into some of the less familiar types of surveys, and that's where it gets really interesting. You're talking topographical surveys, underground surveys, drainage surveys, feature surveys. I got to admit, some of these were completely new to me.
Yeah, they might not be as well known, but they're super important. I mean, they really inform a lot of the design decisions, and they can help make sure a project is successful in the long run.
Okay, so let's start with topographical surveys. Are we just talking about those contour maps, like the kind you see in geography class?
Well, the contour lines are part of it for sure, but topographical surveys, they go a lot deeper than that. They show all sorts of detail about the land, like the elevation changes, slopes, even the types of vegetation that are there. And that info, it's crucial for all kinds of design decisions. Like one of your sources talked about how a topographical survey helped them decide the best place to put a new building so it wouldn't, visually disrupt the surrounding landscape.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about practicality, it's also about like aesthetics and the environmental impact.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's where those landscape architects, their expertise really comes in. They use that topographical data to design things that work with the land's natural contours, making sure there's good drainage, minimizing erosion, all that good stuff.
Now, underground surveys, those sound kind of mysterious. What exactly are we talking about here? Is it like spelunking under the city streets?
Not quite spelunking, but it does involve looking at what's beneath the surface. These surveys, they show the composition of the land, how it's been used in the past, things like the depth of the substrate, different soil types, even if there's any potential contamination. One of your sources mentioned a case where an underground survey, it revealed this layer of contaminated soil from an old industrial site. They had to clean it up before they could even start building.
Wow, that's a good catch. So underground surveys, they can help uncover like environmental hazards. They could really mess up a project if they're not addressed.
Exactly, yeah. And they can also turn up cool historical stuff like those archaeological remains we were talking about earlier. It's kind of like peeling back layers of time, seeing the hidden history of a site.
Okay, next we have drainage surveys. I'm guessing this is about more than just making sure rainwater flows away from buildings,
I
right?
got it. Drainage surveys, they map out the whole network for managing water. Stormwater, wastewater, everything from the drains and sewers to things like retention ponds, infiltration basins. They make sure those systems follow environmental rules, and they're designed to handle runoff effectively so you don't get flooding and erosion. Actually, it was interesting. One of your sources talked about how they're using more sustainable techniques now for drainage, like, bioswales, rain gardens. They're becoming more common in urban designs.
So it's like working with nature, right? Mimicking those natural drainage patterns to create a more sustainable, resilient environment.
Exactly. And those nature-based solutions, they're not just practical. They can actually make cities more beautiful, more ecologically rich. They can even help recharge groundwater and improve water quality.
That's awesome. All right, last but not least, we have feature surveys. What exactly counts as a feature here?
Feature surveys, they focus on all the things that make a space, well, functional and visually appealing too. So think about paving, seating, lighting, signage, even, those accessibility features that we often don't even notice. These surveys, they make sure all those elements are incorporated into the design properly, meet safety standards, and, make the space a better experience for people.
So feature surveys are about those finishing touches that really elevate a space, make it enjoyable and accessible for everyone.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And they can even tie into sustainability too. Like your sources mentioned that feature surveys are being used more and more to incorporate green infrastructure, things like green roofs, living walls, bringing nature into urban areas.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm really starting to see how all these different surveys, even the ones I'd never heard of before, they all play a part in creating this more sustainable, resilient, and user-friendly built environment.
And that's the key point here. These surveys, they're not just boxes to check off. They actually provide this critical information about the site. And that helps inform all those design decisions and helps make sure the project is a success long term.
It's incredible how much information they gather, all the analysis they do before they even start building. It's making me realize that every building, every park, even just a sidewalk, they all have this whole story behind them. The story shaped by, all these experts, their knowledge, and what they learned from all these different surveys. Yeah, it really makes you think differently about the spaces we live in every day, all the work that goes into it.
Right. It's one of the things I find so fascinating about this whole field. It's like this constant back and forth. You have the creative vision, the technical expertise, and then you have to understand the environment, and the people who'll be using the space. It's all got to come together.
One thing that stood out to me from the sources was how much emphasis there is on sustainability. Like it seems every step from picking the site to the materials they use, even to like incorporating those green spaces, it's all about minimizing that environmental impact.
Oh, absolutely. Sustainability it's not just a trend anymore. It's really a core principle in the whole building and design world. And it's not just about, lowering our carbon footprint or whatever. It's also about creating spaces that are healthy, resilient, and that make things better for both people and the planet.
Yeah, it's like creating this balance, right,
hmm
between the built environment and nature.
Exactly. Yeah. And this whole shift towards sustainability, it's not just about being ethical. There are practical reasons too. Our cities are growing, climate change is happening. We got to design buildings and infrastructure that can handle, extreme weather, that are efficient with resources, and that actually support biodiversity, all of that.
Like we're finally getting it, that we're not separate from nature, we're part of it, and the places we build, they need to reflect that.
Exactly. And that's where those maybe less familiar surveys, like those topographical and drainage surveys, they become even more important because they give you the data to design things that work with nature, mimicking those natural processes to manage water, reduce heat islands, and just create healthier, more livable places.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. I'm looking at everything differently now, like
Mm.
buildings, parks, even just the sidewalks. I see all that hidden work, all that planning that went into them.
That's great to hear. That's really what we hoped for, to give you a little peek behind the scenes to show you how complex and interesting this world really is.
So as we wrap up, is there one like key takeaway you hope people listening will walk away with?
I think the biggest thing is this. The built environment, it's not static, it's always changing. And we all play a part in how it changes, whether you're, I don't know, renovating your house or just walking down the street. Just take a second to really look at the design choices around you. Think about them. Ask yourself, how does this space make me feel? Does it work well? Is it sustainable? When we start engaging with those questions, I think we become more aware, more informed, and then we can actually speak up for the kind of built environment we want to see.
That's a great point. It's a good reminder that we're not just living in these spaces, we're helping to create them, shape them. So next time you see a building, a park, whatever, don't just see the bricks and mortar. See the stories behind it, all the work, all those decisions that made it happen. And ask yourself, how do I want to contribute? How do I want to help shape my community?
Well said. I think that's a perfect way to wrap things up. Just keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep imagining a better built environment for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains working.